You're here for season 7 of the Whole Horse Podcast, now at 110 episodes and counting. I'm your host, Alexa Linton, coming to you from Vancouver Island in Canada. I can't wait to continue to share thought-provoking, edge-pushing, geeky, and often challenging conversations with horse professionals from all areas of our industry who are working to make horses' lives better. This season, you can look forward to more on the specifics of creating enriching, healthy horse spaces, an area I'm particularly passionate about. I'm so excited that you're here listening in, meeting great horsey humans, and hopefully learning a new thing or two about horses and yourself. Let's get started. Hi, everyone, and welcome back. You're here for the Whole Horse Podcast, and I'm so pleased on this podcast. It's been a while coming, organizing this time together, but I can't wait to chat today with Dr. Rachel Bellini, who's here with me to have a really cool conversation. So welcome, Rachel. So glad you're here.
Well, it's great that we finally got our worlds synchronized. I have to say, I have only blown off like 4 things in my entire life, and that podcast was one of them, and it was like a total blow off, right? And it was clearly the universe was doing it to me, and I think I was kind of meant to go out to Celeste for the weekend and just kind of have that whole thing sort of before coming here, it just kind of, I don't know, it felt very, I was not like, it was a pawn. I felt very just, but
the universe is playing us here.
Yes, completely. It's
oh my gosh. Well, yeah. And I saw Celeste post about you being there. It's like, this is cool. So yeah, I think it all is coming together in a beautiful way. And I'm really stoked to talk with you today. I've been following your posts and following some of your work, and I feel like, we've got a lot of threads that are kind of combining and sort of like, lots of areas of that I think my listeners will really get a lot out of here. So I wanted to start off with just asking you about your journey. So your awareness around horses, you're also a vet. What has that journey looked like for you in a bit of a nutshell, but, in terms of coming to the place you are now with your work?
Yeah. So, I mean, I was one of those typical, humans that sort of was drawn to animals kind of immediately, and have always preferred animals and nature to humans and indoors kind of thing. And so when I remember when I first learned about a veterinarian, that was like it. That was like, okay, that's what I want to do it. But it was more along the premise of, though, I really wanted the animals to love me. Like, I didn't so much wanted to love them. I wanted them to love me. And so I rode horses, and I was kind of involved with horses, but I really did dogs the whole time. And right before vet school, I realized that the dogs didn't love their veterinarians at all. And it was a horrible, horrible job. And so I decided that I would do horses. And so I kind of started out my vet school as sort of the lowest horse person on the horsey totem pole in veterinary school. And so I got like the least amount of experience, and I came out of school with very little experience and no job prospects, and ended up answering a job that was like small animals, some horses. And I was like, well, I'll do some is better than none. And it turned out to be racetrack. And, I'm kind of a neurodivergent ADHD person. And like the first time I drove on the racetrack, I was just like, all like, oh my God, this is like being at a horse show every day of the week. What could be better, right? I mean, everybody's like hanging out, they're talking, they're in lawn chairs, they're shooting the shit, it was like, I was so in my element, it was ridiculous. And so we did that practice. And so I eventually ended up moving to California and doing, a lot of racetrack. And then I, got married and divorced and married a racehorse trainer. And so I ran around with him for a while, and we did a lot of racetrack stuff. And, that was really good. And I learned a lot about horses, and I got to look at a lot of horses and touch a lot of horses, and, just hundreds of, and follow them kind of every single day. And so it was really interesting. But it was just amazing that you couldn't help like what you couldn't help with all the tools you had available to you. I mean, these horses were worth, hundreds of thousands of dollars when they got hurt. And so, I mean, we had everything. I mean, basically everything that's been invented for the sport horse was invented for the race horses before they were for sport horses. And we could not get those horses better. And that just kind of always went in the file of, wow, that's like, why? Like, is that how they were made? Like to not get better? Like that doesn't make sense. And so then I got off the track and I had a little baby. So I went and I worked in a referral clinic and did all the sports medicine stuff with the sport horses. And, again, it was just kind of the same thing. Like we had all the toys, we had all the diagnostic equipment. And again, like we couldn't make these horses like better over time. And it was torturous because it just didn't make sense to me that it would be so difficult to get them better. And so I went to acupuncture school because that was sort of intriguing, but traditional Chinese veterinary medicine has a similar, for me, allopathic model in a way that it's still a little bit symptomatic treatment. So I liked it, but I just didn't really love it. And then my clients were like, go to chiropractic school. And I had a friend who was a DC, a doctor of chiropractic, and he was very good and he was very nice. And he also encouraged me, as did another woman. And so I was like, I went, but I had no concepts why. And so then once I went to chiropractic school, I was like, wow, okay, now I understand why nobody gets better, because it's how they're using their bodies. Not, they have an injury, but they have an injury for a reason. It's because they're not using their bodies correctly, and we're not doing anything about that. And so my friend, who was a DC, he's very esoteric, and actually we are still, very good friends. And his name is Dr. Mike Buskal. And he had been working in the human field kind of on the tensegrity model. And he was kind of involved with Thomas Myers and some other guy named Jekowitz. And it was all about the axial rotation of the spine and rotation of the limbs and rotation. And so he was kind of like, okay, now you're at a chiropractic school, let me show you how to adjust horses. And so he does like kind of a network chiropractic, but it's a global tensegrity base that actually didn't really vibe with me, but the model did vibe with me. And so we actually gave like a talk in 2010 called The Clinical Applications of Tensegrity Beyond the Motor Unit, which was kind of above everybody's head. We got like 9 people and they were mostly a little bit confused, but it was just based on the fact that at the spinal level, you have a lot of rotation. And so anyway, that's sort of the model that I worked off of, and kind of eventually went out on my own and have sort of been, doing that for the last 20 years, where I'm just kind of doing, chiropractic. Like I didn't really understand that. Like I couldn't feel anything was in a chiropractic school. I didn't understand the adjustments. I didn't understand the listings. I didn't understand any part of it. But I understood the point. Like I was like, yeah, I get it. These things I see. Oh yeah, there's a lot of movement here. Yeah, I can totally see that. Once I understood the principles, like, okay, now we need to figure out how to get this done. Because like, there's no way I'm putting a mandible on my shoulder and doing anything with the atlas. Like the horses don't. They don't like that for the most part. A lot of them don't. And so that's been like a long, evolution to sort of where I kind of wound up sort of just in a practice where I just do a lot of, manual therapy on sport horses, a lot like, you do basically, or any non sort of veterinarian does. But I also have this tremendous amount of sport horse training. And I basically, everything that your sport horse veterinarian has done, like I've done that in, Wellington in Florida at the highest levels for all the people with the, the nice animals and whatnot, and so on and so forth. And it's kind of like, I choose to do this for a reason. And like,
yeah,
it's not to make money, I promise you.
I have a sense, and I wonder this is, for me, I know as an equine body worker, even with humans, like
Also being neurodivergent, I really love feeling like I'm making a difference. Like, I don't think that we're rare in that. Like, so for me, doing anything that doesn't feel like it's actually making a real positive difference is just like, why am I doing this? So it sounds to me like you were seeking in those moments those things that would actually help those horses that, at the beginning you were like, how do I help these horses? Are you feeling now like you found some of those pieces that are actually making a difference for those particular horses?
Yeah, I mean, it's it's getting more and more simple all the time, as well as it's changing all the time, and it's almost like every, I've had this opportunity. I feel like I'm to sort of experience every archetype kind of in this industry.
Mm-hmm.
As a veterinarian, as a horse owner. I mean, I've been at barns where I've been taken off my horse and told he was too dangerous, and like, I need to inject his stifles. And I'm like, no, like, I'm not doing that. I'm going to go get my trailer. Thanks. And I mean, and so like, I have the same exact experience as everybody out there, and the same exact problems trying to get the shoeing addressed. I mean, just to get someone to work with me that wants to kind of evolve the horse rather than just manage it to exactly where the moment in time that it's at. And I don't like, that is just not my paradigm of health. So yeah, like I'm like a truth seeker, and like I have this just incredible faith. Like I have this just so much faith in that it's possible for us to ride and enjoy these horses, and that they can also be ridden and enjoy being with us, and that everybody can be sound and happy and feel good doing it. Like I really believe that's possible, but I think that we go about it, it's all, it's just all upside down and backwards kind of.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that leads us into some of these other pieces. So like one of the things that I'm curious about, because being from the veterinary profession, having that, view into that world, what is your sense? Where do you want to see that world going? In what direction would you imagine it going that would be really positive for that field?
I mean, to me, I think it's really, everybody needs to start taking just a lot more responsibility for themselves and stop trying to outsource to people that, don't have time really to care in the way that they should be able to. And so, I feel like there's kind of, on the one hand, there's a lot of people that really would like to do more on their own, and they're being, shamed or discouraged, or like they can't do it in their environment. If they're in a stable with other people, there's a lot of rules and regulations. And so I think that, ultimately veterinarians should be practicing medicine. They should be like taking x-rays and, doing stuff. But most of there should be like a standard of, what a horse should look like at the very least before it can have a saddle on its back, for example. And and the veterinarian should be, just like a body score. If we could bridge the gap between the veterinarians and the body workers, so that the veterinarians would have an avenue to resolve these problems and an understanding that they could be resolved, then they could prescribe, like, I'm going to prescribe a top line for your horse, get rid of your tack, watch this DVD, do an online with this person, and, come back to me in 30 days and we'll take another look. Because if that's what your horse needs first before. And so I just think if everybody, could get on the same page of what is sort of acceptable, like what is acceptable for riding, period, and what that even looks like. We had a horse we have all these vet lists, and there was a horse that was, just, it was, you looked really unhappy, and it was the rider was just, the riding was atrocious. And it was kind of like, here the vet was wondering if they should go do some diagnostic tests. And it's kind of like the riding is, I mean, there's no way that you can separate, like, yeah, if someone had like a giant chain in your mouth and was like pulling you around, would you, think that you needed your back x-rayed?
Yep.
It's just a lot of, I think it's a lot, there's just a big gap in what most veterinarians are actually trained to do, and what people's perception is of, their training and their education, and, where they're outsourcing, they're so immediate to outsource their problems to the veterinarian. And it's kind of like, if your horse is lame, you've missed 25 cues, training cues, probably at that point, training or horsemanship or management cues before that horse limped. I mean, that horse didn't want it. And so it's a lot of this stuff to me is gets thrown back into like the training and development person, who is different from a horse trainer, or, which is different from like a horse rider or a riding instructor. And like, to me, there seems to be a better division there. And then the veterinarians need to kind of step back a level and practice more medicine and less like gait, like they shouldn't be called in for a lot of things that they're called in for. That stuff should be already addressed.
Yeah. Right.
Is my, like by the body workers, by the stuff, like, and so like when I went to chiropractic school, was really with the only intent was to know when to prescribe chiropractic for horse, because I really didn't know. I had zero awareness of what that fit in, where that fit into the picture.
Yep. Yeah. And I imagine that's the case for many veterinarians, where it's like that body workers could be a real resource for a lot of veterinarians. And from what I've seen, it doesn't often happen that way, right?
No, I mean, I thought I was doing just fine without them.
Yeah.
Just like I thought I was doing just fine. But again, I think that, my perception of fine and my level of understanding of compensatory postures, compensatory gaits, all those indications that a horse is in a compensation pattern, and sooner or later, it's going to be unsound. But it's also, again, I have found too that it's hard to bridge that gap, because a lot of body workers are like visual learners, and a lot of veterinarians are verbal learners. And occasionally, some weird neurodivergent person like myself will slip through the cracks, because our, the woman that picked our class actually somehow was, I mean, there was a bunch of we had like graphic artists, and we had a lot of like, weird people in our class. And we also did like at one of the highest means like they ever had, and so it was an interesting, it was, everybody did very well, in our class, but just the same, it's a better brain for medicine, because you have to work on patterns, you have to work on paths. You can't really just work on checklists over and over and over again. You have to layer your experience on things. And so that's harder for, a verbal learner. And so like, to me, they need to know where to put the body workers on the checklist so that they can prescribe them. And then they need to understand what the results are. And so like, I feel like a lot of the work that Celeste has done has given us a really good languaging to where, like I could teach a veterinarian how to prescribe pillar walking.
Yes. Yeah.
Easily. I could teach them that. I could get them to understand why that would be important and how that would help. And they would have to be a little bit open-minded. They'd have to come to the class, but like, I think they could learn that and start to understand those concepts.
Yeah, for sure. And I think you had this beautiful point, just rewinding a little bit around even that sense of, is this horse ready to be ridden? Because I think that if there was a checkbox of this horse has a top line. Hopefully they're over, 3 or 4 years old, like whatever it is, right? But like their body is in a space where they are able to bear the weight of a rider, and they have the skill sets and the training and the ability to do that. And I think that is powerful for you to say that, just like, oh yeah, that's not even on the radar for the most part, right?
No. I mean, I walk into barns and they're like, everybody got injected last week and the horses are standing there with their heads this way and their tuber sacrali sticking out and their posture like that. And I'm like, oh, this is awesome. Like, yay, And so, I mean, it's like, wow, somebody just made like $2,000 a horse. I'm going to make, 300 maybe, it's like,
yeah.
I mean, for me, like I have a lot of issues because I feel like there's a clear way to get from A to Z, in my opinion. Like there's a very clear way. There's things, ways that horses should be, and so on and so on. And I think most people would like that. But there's also just this giant gap. I mean, when you look at Sue Dyson's ethogram, I mean, that could not be any more clearly laid out. She has so many studies. She has studies where they watch the horses in the warm-up, and the ones with the lowest ethogram scores got the best ribbons. I mean, you would think that would be exciting for people.
Right.
Wow, I can just work on, I can just worry about the fact that my horse is, swishing its tail. But then, there's this kind of big gap where like people don't understand how the body is, in tension, in restriction, in compensation, how all those little behaviors, how they're all connected, how they're all part of, the nervous system. And like everybody in this whole bandwidth is doing, their thing, right? They're doing, whether they're doing their osteopathic work or their nerve work or their chiropractic work or their acupuncture work or their massage work or their myofascial work or their this way myofascial work or their, that, or they're focusing on that. I mean, it's all the same thing, trying to get to a horse that has, a balance of tension in their body. And I think that if we could make it a lot simpler for everybody to understand that it's just like, to me, I just look at it as cleaning a room, right? Mm-hmm. Like if there's a messy room and, you put 100 different people and ask them to clean that room, they're all going to clean it differently. And some are going to be like way better than others. And some are, but and that to me is like, we're still trying to get the room clean. We're still trying to get to this end result. And so I feel like that's where we could just have a lot more clarity over what that looks like and how that translates into a successful partnership and like how that same horse is the same horse that is nice to ride and is nice to be around and is, you can find a saddle that fits it and, it doesn't throw you in one direction. And look at that, it has self-carriage. And I mean, to me, it's like, professional horse is a horse in a heavy duty compensation pattern. That's what makes it hard to ride. If all of these horses had self-carriage and they were all balanced, none of them would. When I get on the horse after my trainer, my unbalanced compensation pattern horse, after she rides it, he's all balanced out and happy. It's like I can ride him now, but I don't ride well enough to. I have to figure out a way for him not to have that pattern, basically.
Right. Yeah.
And so I mean, it's the veterinary role has gotten so everybody just calls the vet for everything. And, the trainers, I feel, really use it as an excuse to like, they don't mean it, but that's just how the industry gets where, it's like if the horse is having a problem, if the horse is refusing a fence, it's kind of like they call the vet. They don't. And then I think too, like that the whole problem with the body worker bandwidth is that everybody does something differently. Mm-hmm. And so, you can call a chiropractor out and they're going to do one thing, 5 different chiropractors are going to do 5 different things. They're going to spend 5 different amount of times. They're going to have 5 different forms. Like there's no way for the people to make any assessments about anything unless they're so knowledgeable. So that makes it also really hard for the veterinarians to get on board, because everything is so inconsistent and all over the place. And a lot of these people don't really speak the language, and they may not know a lot about horses. I mean, again, there's just a lot of variation in, so whatever you run into on that particular time is going to sort of be your, I have had people that have come to me like with their dogs and they're like shaking in terror, thinking because the last person, pulled on their dog's leg when it had, bone cancer. Like,
right.
So again, it's really hard for people to know what they're getting into as well. And
for sure.
The whole aspect gets very muddy, but it also, I find that we're preaching a lot to our choirs, we all kind of agree on all this stuff at the end on the same things, right?
Yeah, for sure. I have a personal kind of question, because one of the things I've seen as a body worker, and I've asked this of a few guests recently, because it's sort of like an area that I'm really passionate about right now. And that is one thing that I see that's really missed, and sometimes by body workers as well, is in environmental factors. So like, how much is the way that horse is being kept, the environment that they're living in, the factors around that are impacting how they're showing up in the world, their happiness, their posture, all these pieces. Can you speak a little bit to something that I see as a gap? Is like, I feel that might be somewhere where someone could step in and say, hey, like, your environment is really not doing you any favors when it comes to training, health, all these things.
It's huge. And like, kind of my big, whatever, I used to like, okay, I can inject the horse, I'll do whatever. And then it was like, oh no, your horse isn't aligned, I can't inject it, I have to align it. And now I'm like, oh no, your horse is in sympathetic overdrive, like I can't adjust it, it's not in receiving energy, right? And so, for these horses to be able to get into their parasympathetic nervous system is, to me, just kind of the global response to that question, right? And, whether or not, they can or they can't, where they are in their nervous system when they're in that environment. And to me, so many of these environments make it impossible for the horses to downregulate in the environment they're at. And I think we could do so many little tiny things to change that. And it's kind of like, when I used to work on the racetrack, it was really interesting because, again, those horses are all in stalls. I mean, it's all exactly the same. So it's just a great area to watch your little pattern brain, right?
Yeah.
And you could go from, basically one trainer's shed row, to another trainer's shed row, to another trainer's shed row, and you would see global differences in how aggressive the horses were. And so even in that environment, just the environment of the humans that were around them, so if you had a trainer that was very strict, very sharp, very loud, very sympathetic, very dominating, very fear-inducing, where none of the horses felt safe, they would be much harder to deal with. They would be much more aggressive. They would be much harder to work with. Whereas, the good trainers, the good horsemen, the ones that understood, that kept the shed rows quiet, got everybody out of there by 10 o'clock, really worked hard to mitigate all of those little things, schooled the horses a lot, just really worked hard. Those horses would be easy to deal with, no problem, lay down all day. And so you can, just the owner can have such a profound effect on the horse's behavior and one of my clients had this pony, and it would, like you'd go to the stall and it would like run to the back of the stall, and then it would come after you, with its ears pinned. And I'm like, they had like a muzzle on it, but I'm like, this pony's gonna hurt somebody. We need to address this. And I'm like, can you just put a sign up like to take 5 deep breaths, before you go near the stall? And it was within 30 days, this pony was nickering with his ears up when I came back to see it. He just needed a moment.
Yeah. Yeah. It makes so much sense too. And what a beautiful story, because I think, and I've seen this with some of my clients, and particularly when horses are kept in smaller spaces where they can't take distance, like they just physically cannot take distance from certain energies, which, in the wild, they'd be like, I don't want to be near you. And they go somewhere else, right? Like, I want to be like on the other side of things from you. But often in our environments that we have horses in, they can't make that kind of space for themselves, and it sounds like this pony was like attempting to do whatever he could to make that space for himself because it felt so unsafe. So yeah, like what a beautiful example of just an easy shift that people can make. I love that. Thank you.
And that made his body softer, and so when I went to work on him, he was easier to align, and he had less problems with his back and his feet and these changes in his shoulders. And I mean, and that's what gets so hard as a veterinarian, because these horses are, before anything else, most of them are in sympathetic.
Yeah, already.
If you go down any like show stable with a pen light, these horses all, like, they don't dilate, their pupils do not constrict quickly, right? Like they do not. They are not. They are sort of stuck into this pattern, and they're stuck in it, mentally from their environment. But then because they've been basically in that pattern for so much of their life physically, they're actually physically stuck as well, and that's where, like for me, working at the spinal level, I see, like at all the junctions, I see compression, rotation, fixation, then you have a subluxation.
Yep.
So, before any bone is quote unquote out of place, you've already compressed the joint space. You've rotated it, because that's how it's going to stabilize in compression. And then a lot of times it gets stuck there. The soft tissue contracts around it and it doesn't want to give up. And so, now you basically have a physical manifestation of a sympathetic pattern, because you're actually physically stuck that way with the bones. And then, then at the like spinal level, the dura mater and the fascia that's actually around the spine, that gets sticky. Yep. And that gets stuck. Your meninges get stuck there in that little mess, right? And then some other stuff gets stuck in that little mess, and then you get some ribs out of place and a couple other things, and it just kind of expands out, this little mess, till you get to the next junction where you have the same thing happening, right? And depending on how many nerves, you've got the cranial nerves, and you've got your brachial plexus and your lumbosacral plexus, all super important areas, all where you have these little balls of just, compression, rotation, fixation, fascial restrictions, dural restrictions, muscle restrictions, ligament restrictions. And then you start pulling out the bones that are in the limbs, those are already, unstable. So you have bracing to hold everything together. And it's like, okay, well, let's do their hock.
Yeah, right. Let's inject the hocks. It's like,
when I flex the hocks, it's really sore there, but it's like, most of these horses they never go into extension. They go from flexion to flexion with their legs. They never get into extension ever. And so, that's why they can't grow their hind ends, because the horses actually can't get into extension. So that's where, my hind end work is really, I keep my clients with my hind end work, because you can get, I understand how to adjust the joints in the legs so they can get into extension, right? And so you can, but you have to open up, the thoracic sling has to also be straight, the rib cage has to be straight, so the thoracic sling can lift, so that there's actually some place to go, when they get done extending, they can actually push somewhere. Otherwise, most of the horses just use their side body to bring their legs around, and they just skim them across the ground. They just kind of skim. And so, this is where all the sounders problems come from. It's just, it's something goes wrong with that pattern somewhere, but it's actually the way that the horse is using itself that makes it so difficult for them to heal. And that's where like, if we could get the body workers to better understand, like, no, you don't have to take 80 classes, just do your body work thing however you want, but just do it from A to B, like know where you're going, understand, and then we can all kind of work together, because I think we're kind of on that road, and I think that's what's going to really, I think a lot of the before and after pictures that people are seeing, and people are starting to understand that, like, it's
well, I want to highlight that nervous system piece, because this is something that I didn't really fully understand as a body worker, and I think it's really critical, is that, and later when I started doing a lot of equine cranial therapy and things, and also that I did my training as a human osteopathic manual practitioner, I really got it, was like, the nervous system has to be in a particular state to even start to treat, like, and that requires, certain steps to be taken to prioritize that the state is where it needs to be for that body to receive the treatment. And I think that's something a lot of us don't necessarily learn. I hope it's becoming more, I've talked about permissions and various things on the podcast, and I love how Celeste talks about sort of this open state and what that feels and looks like. But I think that's something, often that step gets missed, and we're sort of treating a horse that actually can't adapt, in any sort of real lasting way to whatever we're sort of putting into that system.
Yeah, I have in my backyard, in my back 40, I have the consummate teacher of that, just exactly that. And he's taking me through, like, all of the different phases of, where everything else is like a miracle worker and helps the horses. Absolutely, nothing helps this horse. Yep. Like, I did body work on him for 3 years. Audrey DeClue did, he had got the full, complete everything that she had to offer, and then follow up, like, did everything, and on and on and on and on. And as it turns out, it's all mental, emotional.
Yep.
All safety. It's all, and he is the shut down beyond shut down.
Yeah, totally.
And so, but what's been really interesting for me from a lameness perspective, because at the end of the day, like, I like sound horses. Yeah, I love horses that go well and that are sound. And I love making sound horses. And I'm really, really, really good at it. Like, really good at it. And so, because it's a puzzle, and to me, it's all, there's always an answer, right? There's always, always an answer to the puzzle. It's just, you just haven't looked hard enough. You haven't figured it out. And so I enjoy it. And so with him, what I'm starting to understand is that if you can't be in your body, right? Like, so many of these horses are withdrawn, literally from their limbs, energetically.
Right in.
They are withdrawn. They are completely withdrawn from their legs. And if you put shoes on them, whatever, that just makes it that much more. But it's like, they are so not there, and they are completely unable to push into the ground.
Yep.
Completely unable to get any stretch at the joint, completely unable to get any kind of stability. And it comes from, like, literally like a fear of embodiment.
Yeah, totally.
It has nothing to do with anything. Like, they can have 100 injuries in their leg, or zero. And it's the same. And so, you know, they can't heal if they don't want to embody that leg. And it's like when you think about it when like someone takes a cast off, you know, like on Hallmark, and they're like looking at their leg and they can't, or their hand, and they don't know how to use it because they haven't been. And that's how so many of these horses are with their legs and their bodies. And that just, because my horse has this foot thing that I just can't. I mean, he's linked on it sort of on and off a little bit, or sometimes a lot, or sometimes this, or sometimes that. You know, and it's like he has shared with me that he doesn't limp on it by bracing it against his body. So like that's how he doesn't limp on it, is that he just, you know, he puts his leg in a brace instead of limping. And that makes perfect sense. I totally get that. And so anyway, the variation, you know, sometimes when he can't hold the brace, you know, you might see a limp if he's way deep in his compensation pattern, or if he's really doing well, he won't limp at all. So it just kind of depends on how much, you know, where the rest of his body is and how much sort of self-carriage and core strength he has to kind of manage, you know, that weak link. But I should be able to heal it, I believe, somehow. And so anyway, recently I've been working with Tara, you know, now I've kind of been through, you know, Celeste and this, and I can't get anything done with him because he's just really not present. And so now I'm working with Tara on the whole kind of embodiment thing. And that is just, again, like a whole nother fascinating healing rabbit hole of them coming into their bodies and healing, you know, being able to heal themselves, being able to heal their injury, being able to, you know, get there energetically and get better. And that's what I find with these sport horses, they don't get better. We just manage. And like, I really feel like every single sport horse that we manage is in a compensation pattern and not reaching its full potential, which is a bummer to me.
It is a bummer. And I like this piece around embodiment. I think like this is gold right here for people to hear, because there's going to be people listening that are like, oh my gosh, is this what's happening for my horse? I have this horse as well, right? My Raven is like this. She's incredibly hard to train. She's had lamenesses since she was 3. And again, has a very challenging time with embodiment. And that was something, and state, because she's the kind of mare you don't see sympathetic overload in the classic ways. You miss it. You miss
my
it.
My horse was perfect.
Completely.
He was perfect for the trailer. He was perfect for the blacksmith. He was perfect for getting tagged. He was perfect for everything. And like now I can't even get halter on them.
Completely, right? As they start to wake up, it's like, oh dear. But it's really amazing because sometimes we miss that state piece because they don't present it. You know, my other mare, it's like, oh, whites of the eyes, she's spooking. It's pretty obvious that she's having trouble in her state. And with Raven, it's like, it does not present in the classic ways. It's more of a freeze response. It's a chain that we don't necessarily recognize. Oh, that's so helpful, because I bet you there's a lot of light bulbs going on for people out there. And I've seen it before. Like I've been called out, this horse keeps running into walls. He hit his shoulder on the barn door. He, you know, like he just keeps tripping, or, you know, whatever it is, these different kind of pieces, or he won't pick up his feet for the farrier, or, you know, those sorts of things. And I think that there's often these really small, but once we see them, kind of like, oh yeah, that's a good indication that this horse has sort of gone into the nutshell in the middle of their body as a survival tactic, and is really afraid of what does it look like to come out again and embody and inhabit this body of mine.
Yeah, and I think like I have you know, one woman I'm advising online, and the horse has screws in its, that guy, you know, is a thoroughbred and had screws in its ankle. And when you look at the horse, he's just completely contracted away from that. It's like not mine. That doesn't belong to me. Like whatever happened there. And so, you know, we're working like with the Surefoot pads, and you can just see how they, like, and you have to kind of, to me, it's like a fake until you make it kind of thing. You've got to move it until the brain starts to pick it up again. All right. So you kind of got to do the movement, and then eventually the brain picks it up. And that's where I really like the Sherpa pads for a lot of this kind of embodiment sort of stuff. But it's super interesting how already, just in a couple sessions, you can see a little bit of a shift. And I see that a lot with horses that have been gelded too, where they get kind of stuck in, that contraction away from that experience, and so I think there's a lot. So anyway, it's getting harder and harder to use my find a way to use my veterinary degree and to get paid.
I can imagine. I want to come back to this like gelding scar piece, because this is like an area of personal curiosity for me, because I see it I see it so much, like the gelding scars being affecting of hind end stability and movement and mobility. What are you seeing in your travels around gelding scars?
Well, I have kind of a recent story about scars, actually, that I haven't had time to post on Facebook. But so I do a lot of like esoteric medicine and energy medicine and spiritual medicine. And a lot of my teachers, they work in the spiritual field, and they have a lot. What we do is like we'll inject scars. And there's been a number of horses that have gotten very sick, and no one could figure out why. And then they would like inject a gelding scar with procaine, just the scar area, not like it deep in, but just basically the, in the fascia, in the tissue, just injecting the scars. And like, one of my teachers, like he would go over dogs and find these blockages in their mouths and inject them. And it was always very much of an energetic kind of thing. So, and I was always kind of like, wow, how do you know, which, like when a horse is really sick, if it's from their gelding scar? And I couldn't really figure out the difference between the two. But I do have an awareness of working on horses, just in general, of kind of contraction in that area. And so for me, like I'll a lot of times use tuning forks in that area.
Oh, love it. Yeah.
Like just kind of you can take them and just kind of feel the blockage really, with the vibration from the tuning forks, and just kind of hang out kind of on the outside. A lot of times the horses will stretch, and they'll do a lot of moving and shifting and changing, and they'll feel that, because they're very protective. I think also descending in, working off body with your hands a lot of times. I'll go in, I will go in manually to the scar and kind of go up there and kind of feel, around, and just kind of see like if there's things that are tense. I'll try to kind of do some manual releasing and stuff. And a lot of times I do find that it is, there is like manual tension, where I'll release something and I'll be able to then release their sacrum or get some more mobility in their hind end. So, sometimes I think it can be like on a spiritual, energetic level. I think it can be kind of on a fascial, like scarring level. I also think it can be on a deep, physical sort of fascial restrictive level, so I think it can affect them on different ways. But recently I was doing a breathing thing with Holly Barnett, like the arterial breath, and I have a hip replacement. I have a scar in my leg, and as I was doing, this breathing session, I actually kind of got an awareness of my surgeon, like in my scar.
Wow.
And I could see him like cutting in my leg, and it was like, the energy was very neutral. It was like he was eating breakfast. Like it wasn't, but he was actually like there, like his energy was actually physically in my leg, right? And so we were doing these clearing breaths, so I was like clearing them out. And I've always had like those scars, when they do the anterior thing, they're supposed to just fissure in between your muscles. So I mean, it really shouldn't affect anything, but I've always had trouble with engaging my quad on that leg, and the scar's kind of been like lumpy, even though it's been like 4 years. And that was like 30 days ago. And like, I now have use of that quad.
Wow.
And that scar is flattened out a lot, like just in 30 days. And so, I think now that the energy that goes into like when we're actually making the scar, probably has a lot to do with how these horses wind up post gelding.
Yeah.
Because I mean, that can be a very brutal,
Yeah.
not inhumane, but sort of non-compassionate, just sort of assembly line type procedure for something that is, pretty impactful, were that to be like a human. So
big time. And definitely that non-consensual piece, right? Like I know for myself, it was like my first surgery this last year was not non-consensual, but it was like, I have to have this or I'll die. Okay, I'll have the surgery. Didn't really want to have it, but and then my second one was consensual. Like I was like, yes, I want this surgery. And the difference in the recovery, I mean, albeit I was really sick before my first one, but it was a very different experience to heal from my second one. I think because of that energy, it's like, when we think of gelding scars, it's like, that's never consensual. I don't think any horse is like, yeah, please take those.
No, and I do. I think that, I think in general, there's just so much around that. But I do feel that if we could, like my sort of thought was if we just think about love and gratitude and like high vibrating things where we're making the scars, when we're doing stuff, like I do think we can mitigate that. And I do think that we can also clear scars for, for the animals and for ourselves. But it's also bearing in mind that, I think that can be really important. So when we start talking about the veterinary role. I just keep getting further and further away from sort of the sports medicine, model, right? Like how, they all come out with their, their machines and like their gait analysis and, everything, all of this stuff to kind of work on these equine athletes and they're in, a sympathetic pattern from the time that they start and a sympathetic posture from the time that they start. And that never is even part of the equation in terms of, and again, like the most expensive horses, they have good posture, right? I mean, that's why they're expensive. But I also think that if people realize that they could take a step back with so many of these animals and, give them self-carriage, they would be like worth more, and they'd last longer and everything would be so much better as well.
That's huge, because I'm imagining even a horse that you start with good posture, depending on the factors that are affecting them can shift, right?
I mean, there's so many things, but if you just if that's your metric for like, your call to action, right, is your horse's posture, then like you would never get to these places. And that's really like what I find with pretty much every answer I have, every question I have these days about the horses. Like I was at, my horse will get bitey, right? So he will like, he like got my chest the other day, and that really freaks me out. Like I don't, it makes me very unhappy. But what I'm learning from her is that's when he's overstimulated, is when he does that. And like, again, I'm not a horseman. I'm a veterinarian. I was just like a backyard horse owner, and then I did hunter jumpers, and I became a veterinarian. Like we don't learn this languaging or this stuff. So, but that's that's very hard for me to deal with. But now I'm understanding that that's kind of an endpoint for him getting upregulated. And I've missed a few cues, like probably he's dropped down, that's him getting up, that's him getting overstimulated. And so like now I know I can stop 3 cues before he even thinks about biting my chest. And so, I don't have to worry about that anymore. I have total control over that behavior because I can pick up the cues before it happens. And so again, that just plays into everything that we do, where if we just learn to, use the cues as our metrics, eventually, they'll hierarchy out of those behaviors because they will feel safer and better about it because, they're being listened to and they're not having to defend themselves voices. And it's just, it's odd that it's so difficult to get to where we can kind of agree upon that, I keep sort of coming back to Sue Dyson and all of her work. It just almost seems disrespectful that we don't honor that more.
Oh, yeah. And I think, I mean, there's so much, and I'm like already planning a second conversation with you. It's like, oh my gosh, where did the hour go? Like, and I had all these other questions about all sorts of things, and teeth and hind ends and posture. So we're going to have to come back around to all of this. But, I think that the piece that I'm really getting from this, the message, is that we need to slow down. We need to take our time and really observe and really listen to what is showing right in front of us in our horses. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we just need to change our paradigm of what we know is okay. Like, it's not, I mean, the whole thing of running the horses around in circles and trying to figure out their lane when we could just look at them on the cross ties at their posture and their muscle development and say, this horse is ready to be ridden, this horse isn't. That would not be if we started there instead of starting, with something so complicated that everybody just feels stupid and shameful trying to pick out a lame leg in a horse with compensatory gait is very hard. And so people just instantly get backed off from even trying or feeling good about it. And so, I want to just, again, like closing that gap, like the stuff that the body workers see, the veterinarians are not seeing. And so if we can just get everybody seeing the same thing, I think we can build better horses faster and easier for everybody,
Yeah. And happier horses.
Happier horses.
Such an important thing. Absolutely. Oh, well, thank you so much for this conversation. It was so good.
Well, I really, you've done an amazing job with this podcast, and I really enjoy. I mean, I learn so much from every episode. I get to take something home and learn something, and especially for, all the things that I'm trying to learn right now, which is a lot of horsemanship stuff, and so it's been really great for me to be able to kind of bring that full circle back to my clients and back to the horses with kind of support and authority and empowerment because of all the congruent voices that you bring to the field. So it's awesome. You're building a nice lighthouse for us all to come together.
Oh, that means so much, Rachel. Thank you. Give a little tear in my eye here. I really appreciate it. And yeah, I would love you to share a little bit about how people can get in touch with you.
Well, I'm on Facebook as Heart Equine. My email is heartdvm@heartequine.com. And I have an old, outdated website at www.heartequine.com, which hopefully is going to at some point be updated, and hopefully working on a Patreon too, which will just have, kind of a lot of resources that I keep having to tell people. I keep having to send them to them separately. Right. So it's like, I need to get something in one place.
That's awesome. Okay.
So yeah, but yeah, email is a good way to reach me.
Okay.
If you don't do social media.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And we'll look forward to your Patreon because you're a wealth of knowledge and we so appreciate you doing what you do. So thank you.
Well, thank you. Have a great rest of your day.
Yeah, you too. Thanks everybody for listening, and we'll chat with you all again soon. Bye for now.